The night of my business launch, every single chair I reserved for my family stayed empty, and I mean completely untouched, like they were never even planning to show up. And while I was standing there shaking hands, smiling at investors, pretending everything was under control, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom that just said, "We're at Jason's poker night, don't make this a big deal." Like the biggest night of my life was somehow optional. Like I was optional. And I remember looking at that text, rereading it 3 times, thinking maybe I misunderstood. Maybe there was a reason. But no, that was it. They chose him, again. And the worst part wasn't even that they didn't come. It was that they didn't think they needed to. Like I didn't matter enough to show up for. And if you've ever felt that kind of silence, that kind of empty room where people were supposed to be, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And if this story speaks to your heart, only if it truly resonates with you, you can like or subscribe, and maybe leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now, because I still remember the exact time all of this happened. It was 8:47 p.m. when I realized my family wasn't coming. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 38 years old. And that night was the moment I realized everything I thought I knew about my family was wrong. But to understand why that empty table hurt so much, you need to go back a little. Because this didn't start that night. It never does. I've spent over a decade in the military. Structured, disciplined, everything earned, nothing handed to me. And at the same time, I built my business from the ground up. Late nights, early mornings, weekends that didn't feel like weekends. And every time I hit a milestone, every single time, my family would nod, smile, and then somehow the conversation would shift back to Jason, my younger brother. Jason, who never really held a steady job. Jason, who still lived 10 minutes from my parents' house and somehow needed their help with everything. And I can't even count how many times I heard my mom say, "He just needs more support right now." Like that explained everything. Like that made it okay. And I told myself it didn't bother me. I told myself I didn't need their validation. But then my launch came up. The biggest moment of my career outside the military. And for once, just once, I wanted them there. Not for approval. Just to show up. To sit in those seats with their names on them. To see what I built. And they all said they would. Every single one of them. My mom, my dad, Jason, even my husband Daniel promised he wouldn't miss it. And I believed them. I actually believed them, which is probably the part I regret the most. Because looking back now, there were signs, small things, little comments, the way my mom hesitated when I gave her the time, the way Jason joked about having something more fun that night, the way Daniel kept checking his phone the day before, like he was waiting for something else, something more important, and I didn't push it. I didn't question it, because I didn't want to be that person, the one who begs their own family to care. But maybe I should have. Because if I had, maybe I would have found out the truth before I walked into that room and saw those empty chairs. Because what I didn't know then, what none of the guests in that room knew, was that this wasn't just them skipping my event. This was something planned, something they had already decided long before that night. And the person who made that decision wasn't who I thought it was. Growing up, I used to think it was normal, the way everything in our house quietly revolved around Jason, like gravity just pulled everything toward him, and the rest of us adjusted without saying it out loud, and I did not notice it all at once. It was small things at first. Like how my mom would leave work early to pick him up from practice, but would forget I had a late school event. So I would sit on the curb outside my high school, backpack on my lap, watching cars come and go until the parking lot was almost empty, and when she finally showed up, she would say, "I am sorry, Jason had a rough day." Like that explained everything. Like my day did not matter as much. And I remember once I got a certificate for academic excellence. It was not a huge thing, just a printed piece of paper. But I was proud of it. I brought it home and set it on the kitchen counter, and my dad glanced at it and said, "That is nice," then turned right back to Jason, who was talking about some video game tournament he wanted to enter. and within minutes, my certificate was buried under mail and grocery receipts, like it had never been there at all. And it became this quiet pattern, this unspoken rule. Jason needed more, Jason got more, and I learned how to need less. Or at least how to pretend I did. And even birthdays felt different. When I turned 16, I got a simple dinner at home, store-bought cake, a card with both their signatures. But when Jason turned 16 a year later, they threw him a backyard party, rented tables, string lights, invited half the neighborhood, and I remember standing by the kitchen window watching it all, not even jealous, just confused. Like I was missing something everyone else understood. And it was not that they were cruel, that is the strange part. They were never openly mean to me, they just prioritized him, over and over again, in ways that added up over time, like drops of water carving into stone. And when I decided to join the military, my mom cried, not because she was proud, but because she said, "Why would you choose something so hard for yourself?" And I remember telling her, "Because no one else is going to do it for me." And she just shook her head like she did not really hear me. And when I left for training, Jason did not even come to say goodbye. He was busy, something about a tournament again. And my dad gave me a quick hug at the airport and said, "Make smart choices." But it felt more like a warning than encouragement. And I carried that with me for years. I told myself I did not need them. I built my life on structure, discipline, results, things that made sense. Things that did not change depending on who needed attention that day. And when I started my business, I kept it mostly to myself at first, not because I did not trust them, but because I did not expect them to care. And yet, slowly, as it grew, as it became real, they started paying attention, asking questions, showing interest. And for the first time, it felt different, like maybe something had shifted, like maybe they finally saw me. And when I told them about the launch, they all said they would be there without hesitation, no excuses, no, "Jason needs us more." Just simple yeses. And I remember hanging up the phone that night thinking, maybe this time is different. Maybe this time they are choosing me. And that thought stayed with me all the way up until the night of the event. Right up until I looked at those empty chairs and realized something I had been trying not to see my entire life was still exactly the same. And the worst part was, deep down, I think a part of me already knew it would end this way. The first real shift did not feel like a big moment at the time. It felt small, almost quiet, like something you could miss if you were not paying attention. It happened about a year before the launch, when I finally stopped trying to prove anything to my family and started focusing completely on building something for myself. I remember sitting in my apartment at 2 in the morning, laptop open, coffee gone cold, working through numbers that barely made sense yet, and thinking, this is mine. No one can take this from me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt steady, like I was building something that did not depend on anyone showing up or not showing up. And slowly, things started to move. I landed my first real client, then another. Then a contract that actually made me pause and reread the email twice because I thought there had to be a mistake. And when I told my family about that one, something changed in their tone, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. My mom said, "Wow, that sounds serious." Like she was hearing about it for the first time, like it had suddenly become real. And even my dad asked a follow-up question, which was rare. "And Jason?" Jason laughed at first, like it was a phase. He said, "So what? You are running some little side hustle now." And I just said, "It is not little." And he shrugged like it did not matter either way. But then as the months went on, and the business kept growing, that shrug started to change. It became shorter, tighter, like he did not like where this was going. And I started noticing how conversations shifted when I spoke. How Jason would interrupt or make a joke. How my mom would quickly redirect attention back to him. But it did not land the same anymore, because now there was something measurable behind what I was doing. Numbers, results, things they could not ignore forever. And when I officially announced the launch event, something interesting happened. Everyone said yes immediately. No hesitation, no excuses, my mom said. Of course we will be there. My dad said. Would not miss it. Even Jason said. Yeah, I will swing by, in that casual tone like he was doing me a favor. And Daniel, my husband, put his hand on mine and said, I will be right there with you the whole night. And I remember looking around that table thinking, this feels different, like maybe I had finally crossed some invisible line where they could not brush me off anymore. But there were still little things. Small cracks that I tried not to focus on, like how Jason kept making comments about hosting a poker night that same week, joking about how people would rather come to something fun, and everyone laughed a little too easily. Or how my mom asked what time my event ended, not just when it started. And when I told her it would probably go until 10, she nodded slowly like she was calculating something in her head. And Daniel, he started checking his phone more often, especially when Jason texted. I could see the name light up on the screen, and each time it did, something in his expression shifted just slightly. Not enough to call out, but enough that I noticed. And I told myself I was overthinking it, that this was just nerves, that big events made everything feel heavier than it actually was. But the closer the date got, the more those small moments started to stack up, like pieces of something I could not quite see yet. And the day before the launch, when Jason casually said, Hey, I am still doing poker tomorrow night, just so you know, and my mom laughed and said, You and your timing. Something in my chest tightened in a way I could not explain, because it did not sound like a joke, it sounded like a plan, and I realized, too late, that whatever was about to happen had already been decided without me. The day of the launch started early, earlier than it needed to. Because I could not sleep, I kept replaying everything in my head, every detail, every possible thing that could go wrong, and somewhere in the middle of that, I kept thinking about those small moments from the day before, the way my mom had paused, the way Jason had smiled when he mentioned poker night, the way Daniel kept checking his phone, and I told myself again that I was overthinking it, that today was going to be different. So I got up, got dressed, put on that blazer I had been saving for this exact night, and I went to the venue hours early to make sure everything was perfect. And it was. The lighting, the layout, the tables, especially that one section near the front where I had reserved seats just for my family, each one labeled, each one set carefully like it mattered, because to me, it did. And as guests started arriving, everything moved fast. Conversations, introductions, handshakes, I stayed focused, professional, exactly how I had trained myself to be. But every few minutes, I found myself glancing over at that section, just checking, just waiting. And at first, it made sense that they were not there yet. People run late, traffic happens. I told myself that over and over, until about 30 minutes in, when most of the room was already filled, and those seats were still empty. And that is when I sent the first message. Just a simple one. Hey, are you guys close? And I watched my phone for a response that did not come right away. And then 5 minutes later, it buzzed, and it was not just one reply. It was a group message, and my mom had written, We are at Jason's, he already had people over. We will try to come by later. And I remember just staring at that screen, not fully understanding it at first, like the words were there but the meaning had not caught up yet. And I typed back, Tonight is the launch. Like maybe she forgot, like maybe this was some misunderstanding. And Jason replied this time, Relax, it is just a launch. This is already happening. You will be fine. And there was something in that message, something casual, something dismissive, like this had already been decided, and I was the only one who did not know, and I looked up from my phone and saw people watching me, smiling, waiting, expecting me to keep moving, and I did. I put my phone down, I kept talking, I kept presenting. I kept pretending like nothing was wrong, but inside, something had already shifted, and it was not just that they were not coming, it was how easily they chose not to, how natural it seemed to them, like my night was something they could step in and out of whenever it was convenient. And as the evening went on, more messages came in, little updates that made it worse, my mom saying, Jason's friends already brought snacks. Like that mattered. My dad adding, we will leave soon. But never actually leaving. And Daniel, my husband, he stopped responding altogether. And that was the moment everything really started to fall apart. Because I realized he was not just late, he was there with them. And suddenly, all those small signs from before lined up in a way I could not ignore anymore. The phone checks, the hesitation, the timing. It was not random, it was coordinated, and I was the only one left out of it. And by the time I finally looked back at those empty chairs again, hours into the night, with everyone else settled in and my event moving forward without them, I understood something that I had been jazzed in my entire life. This was not an accident, it was a choice, and they had all made it together. After the last guest left and the room finally went quiet, I stood there for a few seconds longer than I needed to, just looking at those empty chairs like they might suddenly make sense if I stared long enough. And then I started packing up. Slow at first. Folding programs, stacking unused name cards, anything to keep my hands busy so I did not have to think about what had just happened. And when I finally stepped outside into the cool air, I pulled out my phone again, not because I expected anything different, but because I needed to see it clearly. And there they were, messages still coming in like nothing was wrong, my mom texting, "Are you still there? We can come now." Like the timing did not matter. Like showing up late was the same as showing up at all. My dad adding, "We got caught up here." And Jason sending a thumbs up emoji like this was some casual plan that shifted. And then there was Daniel, my husband. Still nothing from him. Not one message. Not one call. And that silence hit harder than anything else. So I called him. Once, twice, 3 times. Each call going straight to voicemail. And I left one message. Just one. I said, "Hey, I do not know what is going on, but I needed you here tonight." And even as I said it, I could hear how controlled my voice sounded, how flat, like I was holding something back. I was not ready to let out, and when I hung up, I waited, standing there in the parking lot, watching the screen, waiting for it to light up, but it never did. And that was the moment I realized I was done waiting, at least for that night. So I went home, still in my work clothes, still carrying that same quiet feeling I could not shake. And the next morning, I tried again, not because I believed them, but because I needed to understand. I called my mom. She picked up on the second ring, her voice overly bright, like she was trying to smooth something over before I even spoke. She said, "Honey, we were just about to head over." And I stopped her. I said, "You said that last night." And there was a pause, a small one, but long enough to say everything. And then she said, "Jason already had people there. We did not want to leave him." And I asked, "So you all stayed?" And she said, "We thought you would understand." And that sentence stayed with me longer than anything else, because it was not an apology, it was an expectation. Like my role was to accept it, to make it make sense for them. And I did not argue. I just said, "Okay," and hung up. And then I called my dad. Same pattern, same tone, explanations that felt rehearsed, like they had already talked about what to say. And then finally Daniel called me back, hours later, and his first words were, "I did not think it would be a big deal." And I remember just sitting there, phone in my hand, not even responding right away, because I was trying to understand how he could say that, how he could reduce everything I had built, everything that night meant, into something small enough to ignore. And I asked him, "Where were you?" And he said, "At Jason's," like it was obvious, like it did not need explaining. And I said, "You told me you would be there with me." And he went quiet for a second before saying, "I did not want to make things awkward." And that was it. That was the moment something in me shut off completely. Because it was not just that they chose him. It was that they all agreed it was the easier choice, the more comfortable one. And I spent the rest of that day going through messages, reading them again, seeing the timestamps, the overlapping conversations, the way they had all been talking to each other while I was standing there alone, and every message, every missed call, every delayed response just confirmed what I already felt, that I had been the only one taking that night seriously. And by the time evening came again, I had stopped reaching out completely, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something I had been avoiding for years. You cannot fix something that was never meant to include you. And I sat there in my apartment, phone silent for the first time in a long time, realizing that I had never felt more alone, even when surrounded by people, than I did right then. The days after that call did not feel dramatic. There was no yelling, no confrontation, just a quiet kind of distance that settled in and stayed there. And I went back to work, like nothing had happened, because that is what I knew how to do. I followed my schedule, I answered emails, I showed up where I needed to show up, but everything felt slightly off, like I was moving through something that had already shifted without me catching up yet. And at night, when everything slowed down, that was when it hit the hardest. Not the anger, but the absence. The realization that the people I had spent my whole life trying to stay connected to were not really there in the way I thought they were. And I started noticing things I had ignored before, like how quiet my apartment actually was. How I did not have anyone I could call just to talk, without explaining everything first. How even my marriage felt distant, like Daniel was in the same space but not really present, and we did not argue about it. We just stopped talking about anything that mattered, and that silence between us grew in a way that felt heavier than any fight could have been. And one night, about a week after the launch, I came home later than usual, sat down on the edge of my bed, still in my uniform, and I realized I had not heard from my family at all that day. Not a message, not a call, nothing. And for a second I thought about reaching out, just to see if anything had changed, but I did not. Because I already knew what I would get. The same tone, the same explanations, the same expectation that I would just accept it. And something in me had stopped wanting to do that, and I think that was the lowest point, not because I was completely alone, but because I finally saw that I had been alone in this way for a long time without admitting it. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. And I sat there for a while, not doing anything, not trying to fix it, just letting that understanding settle in. And it was not loud or overwhelming. It was quiet, almost calm, like something had finally stopped moving inside me. And after a while, I stood up, changed out of my uniform, and went to my desk, opened my laptop. Not because I felt motivated, but because it was something steady, something that made sense. And as I went through my emails, I noticed one I had not opened yet from the night of the launch. The subject line was simple, just a name I did not recognize, and for a second I hesitated, because I almost did not have the energy to deal with anything new. But then I clicked it anyway, and as I started reading, something small shifted again. Not a big change, not a sudden feeling, just a quiet sense that maybe that night had not been defined only by what I lost, but also by something I had not fully understood yet. And for the first time since everything happened, I felt something different, not hope exactly, but the beginning of something that could become it. The email was not long, just a few lines. But I read it 3 times before it really sank in. It was from the man who had shaken my hand that night, the one who said they wanted to invest, and he followed up with specifics, a meeting request, numbers that were not vague anymore, timelines, next steps, everything clear, everything real. And I did not react right away. I just sat there for a moment, letting it settle, because part of me was still in that quiet place from the days before. But another part of me, the part that had carried me through years of structure and discipline, recognized exactly what this meant. So I replied, short and direct, confirming the meeting, and then I closed my laptop and just sat there, not overwhelmed, not excited, just steady, like something had finally aligned in a way that made sense without needing anyone else to validate it. And from that point on, everything I did was focused, intentional, I adjusted my schedule, blocked out time, prepared documents, reviewed projections. I treated it the same way I approached everything in the military, with precision, with control, and I did not tell my family. Not because I was hiding it, but because it did not occur to me to share it, and that in itself felt like a shift, a quiet one, but real. And over the next few weeks, my routine changed. Mornings started earlier, nights stretched longer, but it did not feel draining. It felt like movement, like progress that I could actually see. And I stopped checking my phone as often, stopped looking for messages that were not coming, stopped replaying conversations that no longer mattered. And when my mom eventually texted something casual about dinner, I read it, set the phone down, and did not respond right away. Not out of anger, but because it was no longer the first thing on my mind, and that was new for me. And Daniel, he tried to act normal, like nothing had shifted between us. Small talk, routine questions, but there was a distance now that he could not close with words. And I did not push him to. I just moved forward, one step at a time. And the meeting came. Then another, then a series of calls that built on each other, each one more concrete than the last, and I showed up to every single one prepared. Clear, direct, the way I had learned to be. And people responded to that. They listened. They engaged. They took me seriously, in a way that did not depend on who I was related to or who stood next to me. And I started to notice something else too. Something small but important. I was not thinking about that empty table anymore, not in the same way. It was still there in the back of my mind. But it did not define the moment the way it had before. It became part of the story, not the center of it. And one afternoon, after a long call that ended better than I expected, I closed my laptop and realized I had not thought about Jason at all that day, not once, and that felt like a bigger shift than anything else. And I went for a walk, just to clear my head. And for the first time in a while, everything felt quiet in a different way. Not empty, just calm, like I was finally standing on something solid that I built myself. And I did not know exactly where it was all going yet, but I could see the direction clearly now, and it was leading somewhere bigger than anything they had ever expected from me. The first time I saw my name on an official document next to real numbers, not estimates, not projections, but confirmed figures, I did not react the way I thought I would. There was no big moment, no celebration, just a quiet pause where I leaned back in my chair and read it again, letting it settle in, because it was not just about the money, it was about what it represented. Every late night, every decision, every time I chose to keep going when it would have been easier to stop, and now it was all there, clear, structured, real, and the meetings that followed felt different too. Not just conversations anymore, but negotiations, terms, expectations, and I walked into each one prepared, calm, controlled, wearing the same mindset I carried in uniform, focused on facts, not emotions. And people noticed that. I could see it in the way they listened, the way they paused before responding, the way they asked for my input instead of assuming anything about me. And for the first time in a long time, I was not being compared to anyone, not measured against Jason, not placed in the background of someone else's story. I was the one leading the conversation, setting the direction, and that shift felt solid, not temporary, not dependent on approval, just real. And one afternoon after a long session, I caught my reflection in the glass wall of the conference room, still in my uniform from earlier that day, my name clearly visible on the tag, my posture straight, my expression steady, and for a second, I just looked at that version of myself, not as someone trying to prove something, but as someone who already had, and I realized I did not feel the need to share this moment with anyone, not because it did not matter, but because it finally belonged to me. And later that week, when the agreement was finalized, I signed my name without hesitation. No second guessing, no looking around for validation. Just a simple, deliberate action that marked the end of one phase and the beginning of another. And after that, Everything started moving faster. Calls, planning, expansion, decisions that carried weight but also clarity, and I handled each one the same way. Step by step, grounded, focused, and somewhere in the middle of all that movement, I stopped thinking about whether anyone would show up for me, because I already knew the answer, and it no longer affected what I was building. And then, one morning, as I was getting ready for the day, adjusting my jacket, checking my schedule, my phone lit up with a notification. Not just one, but several, all at once, missed calls, messages, names I had not seen in a while appearing back to back, and I stood there for a moment, looking at the screen, recognizing every name immediately. And that was when the timeline caught up, because everything that had been building quietly up to this point had finally reached them, and now they were calling. The phone kept lighting up while I stood there. One notification after another, stacking on the screen, until I could barely see the time anymore. And for a moment, I did not touch it. I just let it ring, let it vibrate against the counter, because something about that sudden urgency felt familiar in the worst way. Like now it mattered. Now I mattered. And I already knew why. I had seen the email. I had signed the agreement. The numbers were real. And somehow, in a way I did not even track, that information had reached them, and I picked up the phone finally, not to answer, just to look. 76 missed calls. Messages from my mom, my dad, Jason, even extended family I had not spoken to in months, all saying different versions of the same thing. Call us back. We need to talk. Why did you not tell us? And I stood there reading them slowly, not rushing, not reacting. Just taking in the shift? Because this was the same silence I had felt before, just reversed. And it did not feel good the way I thought it might. It just felt clear. And a knock on the door pulled me out of that moment. Sharp, unexpected, and I knew before I even moved who it was. Because no one else would show up unannounced like that, not anymore. And when I opened the door, they were all there. My mom in front, hands clasped together like she was holding something in. My dad just behind her, quieter, watching, Jason off to the side, leaning back like he was trying to act casual but not quite pulling it off, and Daniel, standing just a little apart from everyone else, like he was not sure where he fit anymore, and for a second, no one spoke. They just looked at me, like they were waiting for me to say something first, to break the silence for them. And I did not. I just stepped back and let them come in. Because I needed to see this clearly. I needed to hear what they would say now that everything had shifted. And they moved inside slowly, looking around like they had not been here before, like this was a different space than the one they thought they knew. And my mom was the first to speak, her voice softer than usual. Careful, she said. Emily, we heard about the deal. And I nodded once, nothing more. And she took a step closer. Why did you not tell us? And I looked at her. Really looked this time. And for the first time I did not feel the need to explain myself. And behind her, Jason let out a small laugh, not loud, just enough to break the tension, and he said, Yeah, that is kind of a big thing to keep from your family. And there it was, that word again. Family, used like it had not just meant something completely different a few nights ago. And Daniel finally spoke, quieter than the rest. We just want to understand. And I could hear something in his voice, something uncertain. Like he already knew the answer might not go the way he expected. And the room went still again. Everyone waiting, every eye on me. And I realized in that moment that this was not just about the deal. It was about everything that led up to it, everything they thought they knew about me, everything they assumed would stay the same. And now they were here, standing in front of me, expecting something. Expecting me to fill in the gap between who I was before and who I had become. And I took a breath. Steady, controlled. The same way I had learned to do in every high-pressure situation. And I knew exactly what I was about to say. Because it was not just the truth about the deal, it was the truth about all of it, and they were not ready for that. I looked at all of them for a second longer before I said anything. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be clear. Completely clear. And when I finally spoke, my voice came out steady, almost calm in a way that made all of them pause. I said, "You already know why I did not tell you." And my mom blinked like she did not expect that answer, like she thought I would soften it for her. "We just want to understand," she repeated, and I nodded slightly. "No, you want to feel included now." And that shifted something in the room immediately. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small tightening in the air. And Jason let out another short laugh, but it did not carry the same confidence this time. "Come on, Emily. That is not fair," he said, and I looked at him directly. "What part of it is not fair?" And he hesitated just for a second before saying, "We did not know it was that serious." And I tilted my head slightly. Not aggressively, just enough to hold that statement in place. "I told you exactly what it was." And he opened his mouth to respond, then stopped, because there was nothing to add that would not contradict what he had already said. And my dad stepped in then, quieter, trying to smooth it over. "We thought we had time." And I nodded again. "You did. You had the entire night." And that landed. You could see it in the way his shoulders shifted, the way he looked down instead of at me. And my mom took another step forward, her voice softer now. "We were going to come after." And I shook my head slightly, not dismissive, just final. "After it was over." And she did not respond to that, because there was no way to reframe it. And Daniel finally spoke again, his voice lower than before. "I should have been there." And I looked at him for a moment, longer than I had looked at anyone else, because that was the one part that still felt unfinished. "You said you would be," I said. And he nodded. "I know." And then nothing. No explanation, no defense, just that acknowledgement hanging there. And I let it sit, because for once I was not going to fill the silence for anyone. And after a few seconds, my mom tried again, her tone shifting into something more familiar, more hopeful. "We can make it up to you," she said. "We are here now." And I felt something settle completely in that moment, like a line finally becoming visible, and I said, "That is not how this works." And she frowned slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" And I took a breath, steady, the same way I had before every important decision. And I said, "You do not get to miss it and then show up when it matters more." And the room went quiet again. But this time it was different, heavier, because they understood what I meant. And Jason shifted his weight, crossing his arms. "So what? You are just going to shut us out now?" And I looked at him, not angry, just clear. "I am not shutting you out. I am just not rearranging my life to fit where you decide to show up." And that was when it really hit them. Not the words themselves, but what they meant. The fact that I was not asking for anything anymore, not trying to explain, not trying to fix it. And my mom's expression changed, the concern fading into something closer to realization. "You are serious," she said quietly, and I nodded once. I have been serious for a long time, and no one spoke after that. Not right away, because for the first time, they were not dealing with the version of me they were used to, the one who adjusted, who understood, who made space for them no matter what. They were standing in front of someone who had already moved forward without them, and the shock of that sat in the room heavier than anything I could have said. No one argued after that, not right away, and that silence felt heavier than anything else. Because it was not confusion anymore. It was recognition, like they were all finally seeing something they had ignored for years. And my mom was the first to react, not with anger, but with this quiet urgency in her voice. "Emily, that is not what we meant," she said, stepping closer like she could still fix it by being physically near me. And I did not move. I just stayed where I was, because distance was not something I needed to create anymore. It was already there, and I said, "I know what you meant." And she shook her head quickly. "No, you do not. We thought you would understand." And there it was again. That word, understand. like it was my responsibility to make their choices feel reasonable. And I looked at her and said, I do understand. That is the problem. And she stopped, her expression shifting slightly, because that was not the response she expected. And my dad finally spoke again. Slower this time, more careful. We did not realize how important it was to you. And I let that sit for a second before answering, You did, I told you. And he did not argue. He just nodded once, like he knew there was nothing to say that would change that. And Jason sighed. Louder this time, frustrated. So what now? You are just going to hold this over us forever. And I looked at him steady. No, I am just not going to ignore it anymore. And that landed differently, because it was not about punishment. It was about acknowledgement, something they had avoided for a long time, and Daniel shifted slightly where he stood, his voice quieter when he spoke. What does that mean for us? And I turned to him fully then, because that question mattered more than the rest. It means I am not going to keep pretending things are fine when they are not. And he nodded slowly, like he was processing something he had not allowed himself to see before. And my mom tried again, her voice softer now, almost careful. We can do better. And I believed that she believed it, but belief was not the same as change, and I said, Maybe you can, but that does not mean I have to wait around to see if you do. And that was the moment everything settled into place, not resolved, not fixed, just clear, like the shape of something finally visible after being blurred for too long. And no one had an immediate response to that, because there was no simple way to answer it. No quick fix, no apology that could rewind what had already happened. And we stood there like that for a while, not arguing, not raising voices, just existing in that space where everything had been said without needing to be repeated. And eventually my dad spoke again, quieter than before. We did not think we were losing you, and I looked at him, not cold, not distant, just honest. You were not paying attention. And that was not meant to hurt him. But it did anyway. I could see it in the way his expression changed, the way he looked down for a moment, and my mom reached out like she wanted to say something else, but then stopped herself, like she finally understood that words were not going to fix this right now. And one by one, the energy in the room shifted, not toward resolution, but toward acceptance of where things actually stood. And when they eventually moved toward the door, it was slower than when they came in, quieter, like they were leaving with something heavier than they expected. And I did not stop them. I did not ask them to stay. Because for the first time, I was not trying to hold everything together on my own, and as the door closed behind them, the apartment felt quiet again, but not empty the way it had before, just unresolved, like something important had finally been said, but not fully settled yet. In the weeks after they left, nothing dramatic happened. There were no big confrontations, no sudden changes, just a quiet shift in how everything felt, and for the first time in a long time, my life started to feel like it belonged to me, not in a loud or obvious way, but in the small, consistent choices I made every day. I focused on my work, on the company I had built, on the structure that had carried me this far. And slowly, that sense of stability grew into something stronger, something I did not need to explain to anyone else. And my phone still lit up sometimes. Messages from my mom, occasional check-ins from my dad, even Jason once or twice. But I answered when I chose to, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, just when it felt right. And that alone changed everything, because for the first time, the connection was on my terms, not something I had to constantly adjust myself to maintain. And Daniel and I, we talked, not immediately, not easily, but eventually. And the conversation was not about fixing things overnight, it was about honesty, about acknowledging what had happened without trying to smooth it over. And that was harder than anything else. But it was real, and real was something I had learned to value more than comfort. And one evening, not long after all of this, I found myself back at the same venue where my launch had taken place. It was empty this time, quiet, the chairs stacked, the lights dimmed, and I stood there for a moment, looking at the space where those reserved seats had once been. the ones that stayed empty, and instead of feeling that same weight, that same disappointment, I felt something else, something lighter. Like that moment no longer had the power to define me. It had become part of my story, but not the center of it. And I realized that what hurt the most was never just that they did not show up. It was that I had spent so long believing their presence was what gave my moments meaning. And once I let go of that, everything shifted. Because your worth is not something other people confirm by showing up. It is something you carry whether they do or not. And if you are listening to this and you have ever felt overlooked, like your effort, your achievements, your life somehow mattered less to the people who should have seen you the most, I want you to know that you are not wrong for feeling that, but you are also not defined by it. You are allowed to build something that stands on its own. You are allowed to choose yourself without waiting for permission. And sometimes, the people who do not show up are the ones who unknowingly push you toward becoming exactly who you needed to be. And I am not saying it is easy, or that it does not leave a mark, because it does. But that mark does not have to be a limitation. It can be a reminder, a quiet one, of how far you have come without them, and how strong you actually are when you stop asking to be seen and start seeing yourself clearly. So protect your time, protect your energy, protect your peace, not with anger but with clarity, because not everyone deserves access to the life you are building, and that is okay. That is growth. That is self-respect. And maybe, just maybe, that is what the universe or whatever you believe in was trying to teach you all along, not to close your heart, but to place it where it is valued. My name is Emily Carter. I am 38 years old. And the lesson I carry with me now is simple. You do not lose people when you set boundaries. You reveal who was never really standing with you in the first place. Thank you for being here, for listening, for understanding, because sometimes just knowing someone else has felt this too makes it a little easier to carry. And if this story stays with you, if it reflects something in your own life, I hope you will carry that understanding forward. And maybe share it with someone who needs it. There are more stories like this. More moments. More lessons waiting. And if you want to see how other lives unfold, how other people find their way through situations like this, there is a whole collection of stories waiting for you. Take your time, stay with it, and I will see you in the next one.